Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in for our class on how to buy homes at the foreclosure auctions here in the Puget Sound. The market is the hottest it's ever been in the greater Seattle area and across the country even. And so with that, real estate's kind of on the top of everyone's minds. You probably see lots of shows on TV lately, Fix or Flop or Fixer Upper, and they all seem to be in Texas for some reason, which is weird. But those kind of shows show sort of the before and after and the happy dance at the end, but they don't really show the how. And so, buying a home at the foreclosure auction is an entirely different process than buying a home through normal retail channels. And so we wanted to just take a moment here to kind of give a sort of foreclosure 101 and provide a real high level overview of kind of the key components of what makes up buying a home at the foreclosure auction. What is a step-by-step guide to bidding and buying a home? What are some of the mistakes and pitfalls to avoid? A lot of this information is often taught in classes where they stretch it out over 3 days and it costs thousands of dollars. And so this will be dense and quick, but we want to just try to help educate everybody, and so you feel more comfortable moving forward in that process. So my name is Nick Jerusalem. I work with my whole family in the business at John L. Scott Real Estate. I have my sister and business partner Chelsea here with me as well.
Hello.
And our family's been in the business now since 1989, and we've helped over 1,000 families in our career with buying or selling homes. We are also joined by our good friend and lender, mortgage lender Tim Lombardo with Cornerstone Home Lending, and he'll be sharing here in just a short moment on some of the financing aspects, what that looks like when you're going to buy a home at these foreclosure auctions. So we thought before diving right into the foreclosure auction process, it might be helpful to give kind of a quick recap of where the market's been and where it's going. Obviously, this is a lot of very dense data that you can see on the screen here. And so we want to just kind of touch on a couple key things. This is basically showing the rate of appreciation and the median home prices over the last 32 years in King County. So very local, very relevant data. And you can see a couple key things to point out is that the market previously had peaked back in July of 2007, where the median home price was $481. They then went through a number of changes in the financing guidelines and regulations. And a big part of that then led to this decline where prices went down almost 40% and hit bottom in February 2012. Since February 2012, we've had month over month appreciation every single month. And the median price currently is more than double what it was just 5 years ago. Now, when you look at this, you see this big double-digit run up here leading up to 2007, and then this big crash. And you see right now, we're again experiencing double-digit appreciation. And so naturally, for a lot of folks, that creates some concern. And the question of, gosh, are we in another real estate bubble? Is this going to pop? Obviously, nobody has the magic crystal ball to predict. But we do want to share with you some of the things that are fundamentally different about our current market as opposed to the previous run up in the early to mid 2000s. So, and that's largely predicated by the significant difference in supply and demand, as well as lending guidelines. So this kind of shows you the last 10 years of our inventory and rate of sales in King County. If you go back to 2008, inventory peaked at 16,000 homes for sale. And then as compared to today, we have about 3,500 homes on the market. Earlier in the year, we only had 1,700 homes. So there was literally 10 times as many homes for sale in 2008 as there are right now. And just kind of zooming in a little bit, this kind of shows you just more specifically the last 5 years. So up top here, you can see your inventory levels. And then the bottom line there is the pending sales. And then down below shows the absorption rate of inventory. So meaning percentage of homes listed that are actually selling. And so as you can see, the market is very, very cyclical, and you can almost set your watch to it, where the inventory tends to peak right around August and September and virtually every single year. And then it starts to decline through the holiday season. Your rate of sales has historically peaked in March, April, May. That's when you have the fewest amount of competition from other sellers, but buyers are out January 2nd ready to buy. And that's why you can see the rate of sales shoots off like a rocket ship to the moon very, very quickly. There's not a slow buildup. It's literally almost like January 2nd, people start showing up in droves. And so these cycles are important things to consider as an investor that, if you're buying a home here in March, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be overpaying, but you will likely have more competition. And so you want to make sure that you're getting the best deal possible. Another important thing to think about is your exit strategy. So let's say if you bought a home in, say you bought it in the middle of the summertime, June, July, and need some work, you're going to spend 3 months fixing it up. And now you're putting the home on the market kind of right in the middle of our downturn, through October, November, December. then you might find yourself with less activity and interest than if you can strategically put it on in the springtime. You will see also there is a little bit of a rebound in kind of the fourth quarter of the year. And this, kind of October, November, there's always this little spike. And a lot of that has to do with people during the summertime in the Northwest kind of check out. Agents and buyers and sellers, they're on vacations, they're not in their normal routine, kids are out of school. So people are just very distracted, very busy. And then once school starts up again in September, people kind of get back into the groove, their routines get settled in, and they decide, okay, let's take one last swing at trying to find a home before we get right into the mix of the holidays. And then if they find something great, if not, they usually will then try to revisit things in the following spring. So Chelsea's now going to share just a couple things that are driving these supply and demand factors.
So home prices in our area are raising faster than anywhere else. They're coming up very quickly, and Washington is in the lead across the nation. So we are rapidly seeing prices increase, which you may have noticed. That is being driven largely by the increase in demand. We've had over 1,000 people moving into the area per week since 2010. So that's a huge increase in population, and that population needs a place to call home. So a lot of those people are being brought into the area to be brought into the tech industry, which is growing rapidly in our area as well. So we can see here that the average software engineer salary in the nation, we are second. So second only to the San Francisco Bay Area, where people on average are making $134,000 a year in their salaries. Now in Seattle, they can make $126,000 a year, where that's an $8,000 pay cut. The cost of living in Seattle is about half of what it is in the San Francisco Bay Area. So it's an easy decision to make the move. So they're coming in droves. And we're not able to build fast enough to keep up with this increase in demand. So there's a lot of different factors involved in that, although we do have 3 times as many tower cranes in the downtown area. They're building left, right, and center. I know if you've driven through the area, you can't really take a turn without seeing a tower crane building something somewhere. However, what's being built is all apartments, hotels, and office space. There's not a lot of condos being built. Condos are very litigious in Washington state, so developers tend to avoid going down that road. We're also very limited in the area by our geography, where some other areas you might be able to just run a pipeline out, and if there's water, we can build. Here we've got lakes, streams, rivers, wetlands. We just have lots of stuff in the way that we can't just build wherever we want to. Once we do find land that is usable, the development process in our area is extremely lengthy.
So Tim Lombardo back here, Nick alluded to the earlier slide that talked about the run up from 07 that kind of tapered off in 07. Start of 08 was kind of where we started to taper off. Market wise, obviously there was a pretty good size fall after that. What's different this time versus the last time? It's a question we get asked very, very frequently. So back then, during the run up, all the loans that were being made were what we call, by today's standard, non-QM loans. So those buyers that were buying were not fully vetted. Their credit scores were marginal at best. The income was never verified, and the job history was never verified. So it really didn't create a very good fundamental foundation for the market. Today, all of our mortgages are fully qualified mortgages, meaning we're looking at 60 days and 2 years, 60 days of pay stubs, 2 years worth of income based on tax returns that have been filed. We're looking at real credit scores. Borrowers have real down payments. There are some down payment assistance programs out there, but those are pretty limited and not everybody gets them. So though they're out there, they're sound programs. Credit is very much being ran, so we're good on all that. We're looking for consistent payment history. So now if you go to buy a house, if you've gotten a loan recently, you probably saw they want to know who your landlord was. And if it was an individual, they want to see 12 months canceled check showing that you've been making your payments on time. So all these things, I believe, and we're seeing right now, are definitely supporting a very strong housing market that's got a good, firm foundation. We're still definitely in a spot with historically low rates. The Fed continues to talk about raising them, and every time they do, it seems to come up and then it goes right back down. So we're still hovering that 4% owner-occupied rate, and based on affordability and jobs, it's definitely a prime time for sure.
So there's, and also just to point out too, there is a Q&A bar. So if you have questions as they come to mind, feel free to jot those and we'll look to answer as many of those at the end as we can. So, when you own a home, you're obviously signing a commitment to make payments for that property. There's more than one way for someone to lose their property. This is kind of the list of the most common ones. What we're going to really be focusing on today is judicial foreclosure, because that is the bulk of the properties that are going to be going to the foreclosure auctions when you're going to be going to the county courthouse steps. All these other different types of property redemption has different options for the seller to come back and redeem the property. There's various types of risk and exposure to you as an investor. And it's a completely different process. And so for today, we just want to focus on the judicial foreclosure process. And so, it's important to note too that, obviously someone going through foreclosure typically is experiencing some sort of hardship. And so when they're going through that, naturally you might be feeling like, gosh, am I taking advantage of these folks? And, it's a fair and understandable thought. The reality is, obviously, when you're getting a mortgage, the bank's collateral for the loan is the house. And so if you're unable to make those payments, they're going to redeem and take the house back. So this is kind of showing you what the foreclosure timeline looks like. So if I were to own a home and I miss my payment, and it's not until you're 90 days late that they can then issue a notice of trustee sale, meaning that they're going to send the property to the foreclosure auction since you're unable to pay. Then they're going to try to sell the home and recoup as much money as possible. Now, when they give you the notice of trustee sale, they have to give you at least 4 months of notice. So they can't just slap a notice of foreclosure auction and then put it up on the auction blocks the next day. You have to be 90 days late, and then they have to give you 4 months notice. So if everything moved as fast as humanly possible, the quickest it could go from missing a payment to actually being at the foreclosure auction is 7 months. But 99.99%, it will never, ever actually go that fast. There's various reasons why foreclosure auctions can be postponed or delayed. The bank also just typically does not move this expediently. So, there are people that have been in various states of foreclosure literally for years. So, just know that, there is a lot of notice given to these folks and to kind of sort out their next steps. So, and then these are just a few of the kind of key components or glossary, if you will, of, who's involved in a foreclosure. So the grantor, that's the person who's taking out the loan. And that's what you'll see posted on the notice of trustee sales. The grantee or beneficiary would be the banking institution that's actually lending the money. The trustee is the party that basically collects the debt, and they also conduct the auction. So they're the ones that are going to be facilitating, sort of the auctioneer, if you will. And then the lien is the money secured against the property. So that's just kind of some basic terminology there for you. So, and then if a property is going to auction, there's a couple different ways that you can see that. So, and we'll show you examples of each of these. So public record, so it is all completely public information. You can go to the King County's recorder's office or go online to their website and search for notice of trustee sales and see which properties are going there. Lots of the title and escrow companies will provide that same information in a little bit more easy to digest format, if you will. There's a few different third-party auction companies and websites that are out there that'll provide the information to you. A lot of them will map it out. And then there's also a notice of trustee sale has to be physically posted on the property as well. So you could be driving by and see a notice on someone's window, and that, you can look at the notice and see what the details are for the auction. So showing you some examples of that. This is what it looks like if you were to go to the King County website. This was just pulled up from a day or two ago. You can search specific dates, and so you can kind of see, who the different trustee is, who owns the current property, what date the notice of trustee sale has been recorded. It is, since it being a government website, it's fairly archaic and not super easy to navigate, and you can get information, but you're not really getting a lot of knowledge from this data. Here's another example of a list you could get from the title company. So basically same information from the King County website, but again, just kind of in an easier to read format.
So one of the main reasons that I got to come here today and join you guys along with the Terizlos was, so I'm a lender. I do a lot of work with auction companies, and I help people refinance out of homes that they purchased at the auction. So, and we'll talk about that piece a little bit later. One of the best and most reliable ways to gather information on a property going to auction, if you're looking for them, is through a third-party website. So there's various different companies throughout Washington State, one of the largest by volume in that they purchase the most houses at auction is a company called Vestas. If you want to know more about them, contact us afterwards and we can help you out with that. But this is just kind of a quick little screenshot, if you will, of a property here on Star Lake Road. The key pieces that this website provides is it does provide a lot of data, but as well as information. So you get a quick little screenshot of the house here. You see the address up here on the left-hand side. If you look just below that, and we'll break this sheet apart a little bit so you can kind of get your feet wet, it shows a sale date. And up at the top left-hand corner shows a sale date of 11/17/2017. Shows that it goes at 10 a.m. In the black print there, you see previously it went on 4/7, 3/24, and 2/24. Doesn't mean it sold those days. It means that those were scheduled days prior. And for whatever reason, the house postponed. Nick mentioned that earlier that, hey, ideally a house could go as soon as 210 to 250 days. It's very, very rare. So in this case right here, this runs congruent to what Nick said. Oops, Nick's gonna go ahead and take me back. This runs congruent to what Nick had talked about. Also shows various other pictures of the house here that they provide. This website has a track it, so if you just want to track it and be alerted when changes come, you can do that. If you click on the map hyperlink in the website, it would show you a map to the property, a street view, and various other things. Key components here, oops, go back there, my apologies. If you look up there, it shows the year that the house was built. It also shows the gross square footage, how many fireplaces, shows who the trustee is, which is pretty critical if you're going to go to the auction and buy it yourself. Shows who the grantor is, addresses. It shows the minimum bid. So it's very frequent, rather, on the right-hand side where the minimum bid is. The minimum bid could be posted anytime before the auction. It's not uncommon for the minimum bid to be posted the day of the auction. So very frequently, you might go to the auction to buy a property. You don't know if a minimum bid is going to get posted. It could get posted for $100,000, could get posted for, more than what the debt is. It's not completely uncommon. So just know those minimum bids, they can be elusive. But typically the first time a house goes, it's the best chance to go the first time. Once a house postpones, it will typically continue to postpone. Cool little feature down on the right-hand side where title details are below the minimum bid. It does show the principal and the arrears. So that in this particular property, the total debt to the bank is about $450,000. Sometimes people will try to get technical and try to take an estimate to what the bank will set the minimum bid at. I recommend against it because it ends up being nothing more than a shot in the dark. As you can see, $450 is what's owed, and they're offering the house right now for $330. And of course, that could get bid up the day of the auction, depending on the condition of the house and everything else. Yep.
Okay, so then this is an example of what the actual notice of trustee sale looks like. So this is what would get posted on the property. It has to be physically posted and also delivered to the house via certified mail. So just kind of highlighting some of the key components. The trustee, so this is who's going to be conducting the auction. You have the auction date, time, and location. So there's 8 or 9 different locations in which the auctions are held each week. And then the actual physical property address that's subject to the trustee's sale.
So first question, and we get this all the time, is what does the auction process look like? So the auction goes off every Friday morning. Some of them start at 9, some start at 10. Different auction counties and different trustees will start at different times. It's really common we hear people say, oh, I want to go to the auction and see what it's like. It's actually nothing like what TV shows it is. It's typically very quiet. There's people walking around. It looks like they're talking in secret. There's not a lot of loud conversations. And the auctioneer, the trustee, will go up. He'll read. He'll start to read about the property. We do have rentals. Auctions in King, Pierce, Snohomish, Skagit, Kitsap, and Thurston. Myself, I'm most active in King and Pierce. Of those properties that go to auction, about 50% actually make it to the courthouse steps. As we talked about the house previous that did postpone, and that's not uncommon. So what is the format of the auction? So it's a live auction. When the trustee goes up there, he will read about the property and he'll ask for who wants to register to bid. It's very important on the property that you know what you're bidding on. So you're buying a house as is. There's no inspection. There's no time to think about it. Once you decide to bid, if you were to win, the house will be yours. When you go to bid, they're going to ask for who wants to register. You have to have the ability to pay the same day up to the sales price of the home. So when you register, you'll have to show them cashier's check made out to the trustee for up to the sales price of the home, at bare minimum, the opening bid. So here's where we come into the actual nuts and bolts of, I'm going to buy a house at the auction, and how am I going to go about doing it? So you can hire a third-party service provider, which we talked about before. There's various different players in Washington State, and specifically in King and Pierce County. Different counties, have different providers. Your auctions, you certainly can go to the auction. You're welcome to register yourself to bid, but you do have to have cashier's checks for the amount to the specific trustee for the property. If you don't have that ability, you've got the option to hire a third-party company like Vestas or Veristone or one of the other players in the market. They will bid on the house for you, and when they bid for you, they will give cashier's checks the day of the auction up to your purchase price, and then it's up to you to arrange a short-term loan with them or to pay them back the same day of the auction. So all those companies we talked about before, Vestas and Veristone, what makes them different from just going it by yourself is they're going to provide a lot of services to you for typically a specific service fee. So they're going to provide title information. They're going to provide property information. Typically, they will have driven the house. They will make notes on the property. The roof's in good shape. The yard's in bad shape. It's occupied. It's not occupied. They'll typically notify you of any delinquencies or maybe even deficiencies in the property. If there's any water, sewer liens, tax liens, things like that. As we spoke about before, they will pay for the property the day of the auction. So you can show up essentially empty-handed for cash. You just have to make some sort of arrangement with them on how you're going to pay them back. So they will provide the auction financing for you.
So, obviously it's a very different process to buying a home at the auction versus through regular retail channels. And so it can be sometimes overwhelming. There's a lot of risk involved in that. And so it's definitely not for the faint of heart. That's where, sometimes these third-party companies can help with taking on some of that risk or doing some of the extra homework and legwork for you. But some of the things to consider, probably one of the biggest ones, is making sure that when you are bidding on a property that you're buying the first mortgage. So when you buy a home, traditionally you get a first mortgage and then you put a down payment for the remaining amount. But there are also ways where you can get more than one loan on a house, or maybe you have a line of credit against the property. And so it's possible that if let's say somebody bought a home with a first mortgage and also a second mortgage, and then did 100% financing, they didn't put anything down or something along those lines, or did a refinance and pulled out a second mortgage and stop paying both, the second mortgage company can actually foreclose on the property and take it to the foreclosure auction. And you're at the auction thinking you're bidding and you're going to get this amazing deal on the home. And lo and behold, you just purchased a second mortgage. You didn't actually buy the first mortgage that has the first position lien on the property. So when that happens, you then have to try to see if you can assume the first mortgage, evict the current owner, and it becomes a very kind of convoluted, nightmarish mess. And that's usually where we're going to want some significant help from an attorney to kind of navigate through that. So main point in that is just make sure that you are auctioning on the first mortgage, and that's where these other companies can provide that title research for you.
And it's if I can interject there, it's a fair point, though we put this thing as the first bullet point. That is definitely the exception, not the norm. So it's very rare for someone to buy a second. I've rarely seen a third-party service provider provide auction information to a client and then lead them to buying a second mortgage when thinking it was a first. That's usually always disclosed. Go up by yourself, it could be a different scenario, but we just like to bring attention to that just in case.
Yeah. And excuse me, also it's important to note that when you buy a home at the auction, you're not buying it with clear title. So if you bought a home from a regular homeowner, they have to have clear title to the property in order for you to get a traditional mortgage, meaning that there can't be any liens against the property, there can't be any back owed taxes. Maybe you put a roof on it, you didn't pay them, and the roofer puts a lien against the house. That would be a mechanic lien. All those things have to be cleared in order for you to buy the home and take possession to the property and get a loan. That's not the case at the auction. When you're buying at the auction, you're assuming any potential liens that are encumbered by the house as well. So that can include some of the things we've listed here. This isn't exclusively just these things, but if there's homeowners association dues that were back owed, they haven't been paying property taxes, maybe they haven't paid the utility bills in years, and you could have a huge sewer bill that you're picking up. The IRS can lien the property. And so these, again, are coming to doing the title research ahead of time and knowing what you're bidding on before you get into bed with them. So, and then if you want to.
Nick makes an excellent point right there. You are buying the house essentially as is. If there's any back bills, such as utility bills, IRS liens typically, virtually all the time will drop off on the 121st day. So if you buy a house, you find out afterwards it's got an IRS lien, regardless of the amount, after day 120, it drops off the property. So when you buy a house, open market, we make sure you've got clear title. Once a house goes to auction, the title's wiped clean. So anybody past that thought they had rights to the property, it all goes away at the auction. So title is essentially wiped clean through the auction process, but dues and delinquent taxes, bills, and things like that, those are still responsible of the owner.
Yeah, and then another point we have on here is just not knowing your exit price and exit strategy before you bid. And so that's where, having, a real estate agent that you really trust can provide you kind of what the after repair value will be. If I do all these improvements, what will the fixed cost be for the property? So you can know, do I have the necessary margins to get out of this and make, a decent profit? And also knowing what is the best strategy for this home. Is it a buy and hold as a rental? Is it better to fix and flip the property? Do you need to hold on to it for a little while because of waiting for some of these liens to drop off, or to try to be more opportunistic with the market timing and those cycles? So just, again, things to make sure you're considering before you take the next step and actually bid on a property.
So this is always the exciting part. How do I pay for a property at the auction? We touched on this a little bit in the earlier slide. When you buy a house at the auction, it's all cash.
Show me the money.
Show them the money is exactly right. So nobody wants to show up to the auction with $300,000 cash because you might not get out of your car safely, but you do have to show up with cashier's checks paid out to the proper trustee. There's no traditional financing available. Traditional meaning, apply for a loan at Bank of America or some other lending institution. They cannot fund on those properties. So you will have to show up the day of the auction with the cashier's checks. If you are working with a third-party service provider, they will provide the cashier's checks for you, and then you'll just pay them back the same day of the auction, or they'll provide you some sort of bridge note where applicable and approved. Bridge financing, because that's what most people end up doing, is they will get a bridge loan from one of the hard money, and we call it hard because it's a short-term loan, and there's very little documentation provided for that loan. So most hard money loans are anywhere from 2 to 5 months, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer. And then the loan fees on those are anywhere from 2 points, as we mentioned below, typically 2 to 3 points. A point is 1% of the loan amount. So if you borrow $100,000, they're actually going to charge you $101,000, and then your monthly fee is about 12%, which is about $1,000 a month carry cost. And these are short-term loans, typically less than 5 months. If you decide to go this way, it's really, really important you work with a lender that understands this process, because not all lenders can lend on homes that were purchased at auction. So there's some key points there that we can talk about at another date, or feel free to call Nick or Chelsea. We can tell you more about that. So payment we talked about, you're going to deliver the down payment. If you're going to buy a house to flip, they're typically going to require about 10% down. So you'll furnish a cashier's check for 10% down to your bridge lender. All the auction companies will charge some sort of service fee on the purchase that you make. So you arrange an agreement with them prior to the auction to get access to their information. They will bid on the house for you as part of their fee. They'll help you get get the people evicted if the house is occupied, and they provide you a lot of information prior to the purchase. So you will owe them a fee. The fee could be anywhere from $2,500 to as much as 3% of the assessed value. I always stress you get what you pay for when you use a third-party service provider. So that's not one area that you really want to try to cut corners and avoid fees, because typically the less you pay in this arena, especially, you're definitely getting a lot less. So paying a little bit more for a lot more due diligence can pay you and save you thousands later on down the road. Next bullet point here is insurance. It's really important that the day you buy the house, when it comes time, that you get the home insured the day of. Once you own it, you own all the risk. And so the second you buy that house and they put the house into your name, because they will transfer title into your name, however you want them to transfer it, you're responsible. So if you buy the house and later on that night the house burns down, it's going to be on you. So it's very important to get it bound the same day. There's plenty of insurance providers that can. If you do decide to buy one, I'd recommend contacting the Jerislos. We can get you set up with the right person. There are some people out there, insurance agents, that don't understand this space. They'll tell you that they're covered, and you're actually not. So it's really important that you disclose that properly. If you disclose it improperly, they can deny the claim, and that's not good news for anybody. So the house can sometimes be occupied. When applicable, the third-party service providers will help you get people out of there. Typically, by Washington state law, the owner If the owner is occupying the house, they have 21 days until they have to vacate. If a property is leased, the tenants can get up to 90 days to vacate. Any one of those scenarios, those are generally the laws as we printed up there, but I've seen all kinds of other things play out. I've seen owners leave the day of. I've seen tenants take 120 days and longer and be, share of evicted. So there's all kinds of options that can play out. Hopefully it goes easier than harder, and it just all depends on the tenant.
And they can be motivated.
And they can be money motivated, like most people are.
Yes.
All right, so kind of wrapping up with a few specific examples of other properties here that were purchased at the auction. We want to kind of give you an example of someone who fixed and flipped a property, and then also an example of a buy and hold scenario, because the main reason for going to the auction, taking on all this risk and all these hoops and hurdles that come with it, is that, you should ideally be getting a discount, for buying the property through these channels as opposed to a retail market. So, if that's where you can find the right margins you need to fix up a property and try to flip it for a profit. As we'll show you here, there is a lot more costs than people usually kind of think of. And it's also a great way to find a property that you keep as a long-term hold for just purely an investment and as a rental property, because you're still hopefully buying it below market. So this is an example of a home down in kind of South Seattle, Georgetown area. You can see a couple of the before and after pictures. This is a pretty extensive renovation, full rehab of the exterior, complete redo of the inside, all landscaping. So this was, a pretty significant remodel done on this property. And so here's kind of the real world breakdown numbers. So purchase price, $212. Auction fees. So this was through a third party that had a 3% upfront fee that was charged. This particular purchaser did use a bridge loan, which required a 10% down payment. You do have those upfront loan points or costs that we mentioned there. And then you have your remaining bridge loan balance of $191,000. So that's what you're going to be paying these interest carry on as you're going through and making these improvements to the property. As I mentioned, this one had a significant amount of fix-ups to the tune of $146,000. And then also the property had to be carried for 6 months between getting the people vacated, dealing with permits. Anytime you're dealing with plumbing, electrical or structural, you have to get permits for that. If you're dealing with this, well, pretty much anywhere, the permits take forever. So just kind of anticipate some of those delays. In this case, it was 6 months of carrying costs, which totaled to $12,000 just through the bridge loan, property taxes, utilities, insurance. Your insurance is also going to be quite a bit higher for a vacant property that's purely an investment, as opposed to like your insurance for your primary residence. This property was then staged to make it as presentable as possible. So the total cash out of pocket in this circumstance between down payment and improvement costs was $192,000. Some of these bridge lenders will also provide channels to actually get some of these improvement costs financed as well. It's really kind of a case-by-case business or situation where they'll look at a deal that makes sense. So in this case, if you were just paying it your own way, it'd be $192,000 out of pocket. That brings your total cost between the improvement costs and the pre-existing loan balance of $384,000. This property ended up selling for $476,000. Sales costs, so you have excise tax, that's 1.78% that gets paid to the state of Washington every time you sell a home. Real estate commissions, the standard in our general market here is usually 6%. That's 3% to the agent that represents the buyer and 3% to the agent that represents the seller. Title insurance is a seller's expense, and an escrow is shared between the buyer and seller. So you have a pre-tax profit in this example of $52,000. Obviously we're not accountants, and so that's why we have it listed as a pre-tax profit, because there's a lot of different variables that go into that too, as far as your tax exposure. Another thing you definitely will want to factor in, if you're holding the property for less than a year, it could be triggered to short-term capital gains, which essentially is just taxed at whatever your current tax rate is for your income. If you hold it for over a year, then you could be looking at just a traditional capital gains, which currently is between 0 to 19%, depending on your income levels, but typically it's going to be 15%. So another thing to consider as far as your exit strategy and what the real world numbers will look like.
Yeah, one key piece, and we try to break this down to a pretty granular level so you guys can all see what real costs are. It's pretty common. It's public record to find out what somebody paid for a house. And if you look at this house, you can see that the buyer paid $212 for it, and they sold it for $476. Well, a lot of people look at that and say, well, man, he made $250,000 or $60,000 there. And the catch is, if you look close at this, there's a lot of fees that really don't have a whole lot to do with fixing up the house. The auction fees, the bridge loan costs, the carrying costs, the staging costs, and the sales costs. Those are all pretty big fees that if you don't get granular with them when you embark on your project, it's really easy to make a mistake. And that's why it's important to rely on a professional that can guide you in the right direction, because we can avoid mistakes, but once you make them, then you're having to pay for the mistake and learn the hard way. And that's why we're here, so you don't have to learn the hard way.
Yeah, because even on a big spread from $212,000 to $476,000, you think you have a lot of margin, but there's really not much room for error there.
Yeah, and you also, what if the market changes 5 or 10%, and it's going to take you, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And so it's, you have to kind of be able to forecast out and make sure you leave yourself, a sizable contingency. You want to have a comfortable buffer, because if things change in a hurry, you could find yourself with a property that you were intending to fix and flip and get out of this bridge loan. And now all of a sudden you have to try to figure out how to refinance it into a traditional mortgage, maybe keep it as a rental. So again, just make sure you're very conservative on the numbers. Sometimes you hit the home run because the market swings your way, but just, and these are all real world numbers from that exact house. So we wanted to give as specific examples as possible here.
The hazards of the short-term plan, but there's usually a lot less to worry about if you go for the long-term option of buy and hold.
All right. So now we're going to talk about buy and hold. Yours truly here. I was able to share my little case study here on a house down in Tacoma that I bought at the auction. Picture on the left is, we'll stay there for a minute. Picture on the left is the way it looked the day I bought it. The picture in the middle is the way it looked the day that I went to evict the tenant. So the tenant got into an arguing match with the next door neighbor over a girl. Guy tried to drive a car and killed the tenant. The tenant jumped out of the way, and he was immediately met his car with the living room window of my house. So I showed up to evict the tenants, and this was the look of my house. Yes, this is real life, and I am the real owner of this gem here. When we got inside, when the sheriffs evicted him, well over 90 days after I bought the property, I was met with 6, 7 people living in a 4-bedroom house, and nobody really takes any good care of things like that when they're like that. So this was my first buy, fix, and hold as a rental. I have other rental homes, but this was the first one I bought at auction, and I'm excited I did it. I did learn a few things that I didn't know that I didn't know. So I'm now consciously competent. Picture on the right is the kitchen. And it was quite the place. So we'll move forward and we'll show what it looks like afterwards. So this is now the fixed up structure. House on the left is the same house, different window, different yard, a lot of different actually. And then that's the new kitchen there on the right hand side. So you don't have to really put this kind of money into a rental, but I'm a believer that if you give something nice, you're going to get a nicer tenant and a little bit nicer dollar for it. The other key piece for me, because I'm in lending, is I understand the value of an appraisal. And so by doing a couple of key things right, you're going to get a higher value on your appraisal. So in this house, for instance, I did put slab granite in it. I think it probably cost me an extra $1,500 for the house, but I know for sure I got an extra $2,500 on appraisal for it. Some people would argue with me. I would say otherwise. So, and when an appraiser sees nice finishes, they're going to value the house a little bit higher. So that's the before and the after. Now we'll just kind of go through and look at numbers on it. So these are real numbers. These aren't the numbers that I paid. These are the numbers that you would have paid had all the loans applied to you. So I did use a bridge loan. I didn't get it from traditional terms. I got it from family and friends. And so they charged me, but they did charge me a little bit less. So my purchase price in this house was $145,000. My auction fees were about $4,300. Bridge loan costs were about $2,900. That's the points on the loan. I put a down payment of $14,000 down. It's important to note that we do have a financing program for buy and hold properties that you can buy them with 0 down. And we'll explain how that works. Just feel free to contact any one of us and we can walk you through that process. So I did put down 10%. I didn't have to, but I did. So my bridge loan balance was $130,000. My total fixed up costs were about $35,600. Did cost me $1,500 to evict the 6 tenants. That was exciting. My carrying costs for my loan, my taxes, utilities, and insurance was about $12,000. My refinance costs, only $1,200. I am a lender, and so I understand the value of a higher rate and lower fees. So I did do that. That's a rate and fee anybody could get. That was nothing special for me because I'm in the industry. My total cash out of pocket was about $72,000 for all my fix-up. So my total expense plus my bridge loan balance is about $203,000. The house did appraise for $250,000. So it's important to understand this metric here, that on an investment property, the most Fannie Mae will lend you is 75% of the appraised value. So I get a loan amount of 75% of the appraised value of $250, gives me a loan amount of $187. So you can see the delta between the $203 and the $187. I had to leave about $16,000, $17,000 in the house. That's kind of the bad news, if you will. The good news is this: my monthly payment on $187 is $1,230. So that $1,230 is my principal, my interest, my taxes, and my insurance. Okay, my monthly rent on this house is $1,850. I don't have it rented yet, but I've got a line of people lined up at $1,850, so I'm pretty confident on that rent. My monthly cash flow in the house, as you see, is $620. This is a 30-year fixed loan. So I put the freedom point at the bottom because I don't work for Boeing. I'm a loan officer. I don't get a pension. And so my retirement is very much based on how much money I can save and other assets and income that I can create. So this house in 13 years, if I take my $620 per month, I plow it back into the principal of the loan, the house will be paid off in 13 years. So at that freedom point, which is in 13 years, all the rent, less taxes and insurance, I'll be able to save or support my 3 girls, which is not cheap.
Yeah. And that assumes that you're not raising the rent for that 13 years.
Great point, Chelsea. So I don't schedule any rent increases in that. So I try to be really conservative on my numbers. So I don't aim for the moon. I aim for what I think is very realistic. Will I have some expenses over the 13 years? Sure, I will. I'll have some maintenance costs. I'll have a few turnovers in tenants. I'll probably have a hot water tank or 2 to replace. There will be expenses. Those are things I'm going to plan on. I'm going to set some money aside for with my cash flow. And once my account is built up to 5,000 or 6,000, I'll just start putting it all towards principal.
Yeah, and then as Tim alluded to as well, like that's keeping rents at a static amount. So I mean, historically, the last 10 years in Puget Sound, rents have averaged 6% increase per year. So as I mentioned, there's just a lot of different paths to kind of financial freedom, and this is one other way to approach that. So that's kind of our Foreclosure 101 class. I know we kind of crammed a lot of high-level information to a short amount of time, and we just kind of wanted to focus on this hour of just being sort of an information fire hose. Undoubtedly, there'll be some questions and other thoughts. This isn't necessarily arming you to then go down to the auction and buy a house this Friday. That's where, deciding whether or not you want to try to go this course alone or maybe, utilize some of these other third-party services. We don't work for any of these companies. We're not paid by them or anything like that. So it's just, we know who, some of the biggest and best players are in the industry. So it definitely would behoove you to kind of do some due diligence, make sure you feel really comfortable and confident in who you're moving forward with in that regard. As far as, if you are looking at more of the fix and flip end of things, that's definitely a big part of where we could come in and add that value as far as before you buy the home, give an estimation of what it's going to actually sell for in today's market. If with these, various improvements, what are the improvements that would make sense to do versus what are ones that you're kind of just throwing good money after bad. And that exit strategy is where we can certainly be a big resource for you. And then if you were to keep the property beyond the bridge loan, that's where someone like Tim, for instance, at Cornerstone Home Lending knows these types of situations, these properties, and how to finance out of an auction property, and can help give guidance on that as well.
So if I can just interject something, if we go back a few slides here, I've purchased a lot of homes at the auction myself. I've purchased and flipped. I've now done one as a buy and hold because that's my strategy right now. That's my long-term plan. Exactly. I'm getting older. I need to start planning more for retirement.
You can't see him, but he's got a lot of gray hair.
I got a lot of gray hair. And so the key pieces that I see people make mistakes on, because I see this a lot. I deal with it daily, weekly, monthly. It's nonstop for me. Your main points that you really want to watch is your purchase price. Don't get emotionally attached. Set your base number and set your max number and say, this is the most I'm willing to pay. So I always say, if I'm going to the auction to buy a house, I'm going there to make money. I'm not going there to buy a house. Buying a house is second. I'm going there to make money. Okay. So your key pieces that you really want to rely on is we'll go to your agent and say, hey, I'm looking at this house on this address. Here's the current listing. Here's a past listing. Here's a link to the house. What's this house worth fixed up? Have them give you a real good number. Spend, 20, 30 minutes doing a good CMA on it and say, what's a good strike zone on this house? Because it's probably safe to say that when this person that flipped this house, When he bought it, he probably wasn't thinking 476. He probably started off with a number like 460, hoping to get a number like 476.
It was actually listed for 460 and got bid up to 476.
So exactly. So,
So
yeah, and I didn't know that. I'm just taking a stab at it because I know the market. I know how it works. So it's really important to know that number, because at the end of the analysis, if you know your three key metrics: what's it worth, what's it going to take to fix it up, and then what am I going to pay for it? And then there's a delta with how much you're going to make. Obviously, you want to make as much as possible, but you have to be reasonable, because when you go to the auction, you're going to have to bid against other people.
Yeah, and that can get emotional and stuff. So you really have to have that walk away number in mind. I am not going to pay more than X because it's going to be time to walk away, even though you really want to beat that other guy.
Chelsea is dead on. It's not about beating the next guy. It's about acquiring a property that you can make profit from. So those are key pieces to keep your number on. The next places that I see people kind of get caught and make mistakes that they don't plan for on the buy and hold. Personally, I love buy and holds because I view it this way. A flip is a paycheck today. A rental property is a paycheck for life. And so you got to kind of pick. Sometimes you need a paycheck now, and sometimes it's more important for a paycheck for life. So key pieces on this that I really can't stress enough, because this question comes up all the time. Our numbers here in red are critical, and the appraised value that's sandwiched in between is of the utmost importance. The higher the appraised number, the higher the loan amount we can get you. Fannie Mae has set a hard stop that the most they'll give you on an investment property refi is 75%. It will not go above that. It's very important to know that if you own the property for less than 6 months, no matter how much the property appraises for, the most we can do is pay off your existing loan. So there's some key pieces there that if you decide to not get a hard money loan at the auction, you just borrow money from mom or dad or whoever, there's some key, and I mean critical components to talk to us before you purchase on how that loan that you get from them, even if it's not recorded, needs to be recorded. Because if you don't record it, it can cause a lot of problems. I've seen it. I've tried to coach against it. And unfortunately, your consequence is time. And money locked up for time is a cost. So important to note that your appraised value dictates your loan amount, 75%, and then we'll pay off that loan.
Yeah, those carrying costs can eat you alive, because like in this example, how long were you holding this one for, Tim, before you refied out of it?
Nick's calling me on the carpet on this one, because this house is not in my line of fire every day, so I took far too long to fix it up. The flip side was the market came up and gave me a much better appraised value than where I thought it was going to be when I started. Right. This project, had I not had the eviction, and a couple of other things that I openly made some mistakes on, it's probably a 60-day flip. I let it marinate much longer.
Okay. Yeah, and then in the fix and flip example, like that was, this one here, this is a 6-month carry, for instance. So on a property that you bought at the auction for $212,000, you think maybe it's not going to cost that much to carry. But in 6 months, it was over $12,000. So it was about $2,000 a month, which that adds up very, very quickly, as far as, especially if this one had a decent return in terms of the margins. But if you're dealing with, sometimes people are buying it and they want to just make 10 or 20 grand. And if you have an extra 6 months of carrying costs and your kind of spread you're hoping to hit was $10,000, you just lost all of that. And now you're upside down $2,000. So just again, kind of really think through some of these timelines. So, but yeah, I think that's kind of all we have for right now. Certainly feel free to follow up and reach out to us with any specific questions. Happy to kind of dive deeper into this with anybody, and just be a resource and help any way we can. So thanks so much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.